A few months ago, a 71-year-old man named Frank walked into his local barbershop and ran into a woman named Patricia, a sharp, warm widow he'd seen around the neighborhood a few times. They talked for nearly half an hour. She asked him questions, laughed at his jokes, and touched his forearm twice before saying goodbye. Frank walked home thinking, nice lady, friendly type, probably just being polite. 2 weeks later, Frank found out through a mutual friend that Patricia had been hoping he'd ask for her number. Frank wasn't unattractive, he wasn't boring, he simply didn't know what was happening right in front of him. Women at senior age aren't passive. They're not waiting to be approached like it's 1975. They've developed a subtle, intelligent way of expressing interest that most men have never been taught to recognize. They ask specific questions. They watch how the men react, and if they get the right answers, they open the door a little wider. Today, we're going to walk through all 5 of those questions, what they really mean, the psychology behind them, and exactly how to respond in a way that's confident, genuine, and attractive. By the time we get to question 5, you'll understand something most men your age never figures out. Let's get into it. Question 1. So what do you do with all your free time now? It sounds like something a neighbor might ask over a fence, casual, low stakes. But when a woman asks this question, especially one who's been paying attention to a man, she's doing something much more deliberate. She's finding out if that man has a life worth joining. Think about it from her perspective. She's at a stage of life where she's done raising children, done tolerating unfulfilling situations, done waiting. She's looking for someone who's actively living, not just watching television until dinner. When she asks about his free time, she is trying to understand his energy, his goals, and his interests. She wants to consider whether she can find a place for herself in his life. Is there a place for her there? Is there anything worth getting involved in? Here's a real example. At a church potluck in Sarasota, Florida, a woman named Gloria struck up a conversation with Ted, a 73-year-old retired civil engineer. When she asked what he did with his time, Ted shrugged and said, "Oh, not much. Little bit of TV. I putter around the garage sometimes. Nothing special." Gloria smiled politely and excused herself within minutes. That same evening, another man named George, also 73, also retired, answered the same question from a different woman. He said, "Honestly, I've been on a bit of a mission lately. I started taking sailing lessons at the marina, which is completely humbling at my age, and I joined a local history group that's been cataloging old photographs from the 1930s. It's more fascinating than I expected. What about you? Have you picked up anything new lately?" The woman he was speaking to talked with him for over an hour. The difference wasn't age, it wasn't looks, it was the picture each man painted of his daily life. When a woman is looking for the answer to this question, there are 3 things she wants to know. Does the man she's with lead an active life? Is he curious about the world? And is there room in his life for another interesting person? If a woman leans in slightly whilst asking these questions, maintains eye contact, and then asks further questions, this isn't just small talk. It means she is trying to decide whether the person she is talking to is worth pursuing.
Question 2. Do you manage all right on your own at home? This question catches men off guard because it can sound almost like something a mother might ask. It is a very clever way of gauging the man's independence, self-awareness, and potential as a long-term partner. Women in their 60s and 70s have often spent decades as the primary caretaker in a household. The last thing many of them want in a new relationship is another full-time responsibility. When she asks if you manage all right on your own, she's really asking, are you capable of taking care of yourself? Have you adapted to this stage of life? And could I be a partner to you rather than a caretaker? There's also a warmer layer to this question. Managing a home, cooking, keeping things tidy, staying organized, involves a kind of daily intimacy. She's quietly imagining what it might look like to share that domestic rhythm with you. At a farmer's market in Scottsdale, Arizona, a woman named Diane asked a widower named Howard about his home situation. Howard said, "Honestly, it's been a real adjustment. My late wife handled most of that. I'm still figuring out the laundry machine, if I'm being honest." Diane nodded sympathetically and moved on. Howard meant to be endearing. Instead, he'd suggested he was looking for someone to step into his late wife's role. Compare that to how Victor, a 69-year-old from Denver, answered the same question from a woman named Elaine at a book club event. Victor smiled and said, "Pretty well, actually. I've surprised myself. I've gotten decent at cooking. I make a chicken stew that my kids actually ask for now. And I've embraced the whole lower maintenance living philosophy. Less stuff, cleaner space, more time for things that matter. How about you? Do you find you've simplified things too, or do you like a full household?" Elaine laughed and pulled her chair a little closer. What matters is that the man shows he has settled in, that he's content with the life he has built for himself, and even takes quiet pride in it. This is where humor comes in handy. It is not a problem for the man to show himself to be a little open and vulnerable. What must be avoided is appearing like someone who is lost without a woman to run the household, or conversely, implying that there is no room for a new person by claiming that his life is going so perfectly smoothly. The ideal answer suggests, "I'm doing well, I've grown, and my life has space for something more." Question 3. Are you still in touch with your kids much? Here's where the conversation starts going somewhere deeper, and where most men still don't realize it's moved beyond small talk. When a woman asks a man about his relationship with his children, she is not merely gathering information about his family. In fact, she's assessing his emotional makeup. The way he speaks about his children tells her everything about how he manages long-term relationships. It reveals whether he has done the emotional groundwork necessary to fully commit to someone new. She's also checking something more practical: availability. A man who's constantly on call for his adult children, who can't make a plan without running it by the family, who is still emotionally enmeshed in everyone else's drama, that man doesn't have much room for a new relationship. On the other hand, a man who's entirely estranged from his family, or who speaks about them with cold resentment, is sending a different kind of warning signal. At a community theater in Boca Raton, Florida, a woman named Sylvia asked a man named Arthur how things were going with his family. Arthur sighed and said, "My son never calls. My daughter's all wrapped up in her own life. I barely hear from them. Holidays are lonely." Sylvia's expression softened with pity, which is very different from attraction, and she spent the rest of the evening across the room. At that same event, a man named Martin answered the question from a woman named Carolyn in a completely different way. Martin said, "I've got 3 kids, and they're all busy building their own lives, which I love to see. We talk on weekends and get together a few times a year. I try not to hover, they've got enough going on. But yeah, we're solid. I'm lucky that way. Are you close with yours?" Carolyn was still talking to Martin an hour later when the lights came up. The winning formula here is love without desperation, connection without dependency, and openness to new relationships without dismissing the importance of family. If this question is answered correctly, it shows that he is emotionally mature, capable of loving generously, and that their heart is not yet completely full.
Question 4. Have you traveled anywhere interesting lately? On the surface, this is about geography. Beneath it, this question is about your relationship with life itself. When a woman asks a man whether he has traveled to any interesting places recently, she is actually looking for proof of one thing: whether he is still curious, whether he has closed himself off to new experiences, whether he is someone who prefers growth over comfort. Travel is the best indicator of all this. However, he doesn't necessarily have to have visited Paris to provide a convincing answer. A visit to a nearby nature reserve also speaks volumes. She's also imagining the future. Women at this stage of life often have a mental list of places they want to go, experiences they want to have. When she asks this question, part of her is wondering, would this man come with me? Would he be open to it? Is he the kind of person I could explore the world with? At a photography club in Portland, Oregon, a man named Douglas was asked by a woman named Irene whether he'd been anywhere interesting. Douglas shrugged and said, "Not really. I don't travel much anymore. Airports are a hassle and I've already seen plenty of the world." That answer closed every door simultaneously. It said, "I'm done being curious. I'm not going anywhere. Don't picture us anywhere together." Now, compare that to how Bernard answered the same question from a woman named Louise at a cooking class in Phoenix. Bernard said, "I just got back from a road trip through the Blue Ridge Mountains. I didn't plan it at all. Just got in the car one morning, stopped in this tiny town in North Carolina, and ended up spending 3 nights there because the people were so interesting. One man I met had been carving furniture by hand for 40 years. I could have listened to him for a week." Louise leaned forward. "That sounds incredible. Have you always traveled that way?" They were still talking at closing time. Notice what made Bernard's story work. It wasn't the destination, it was the curiosity, the willingness to be surprised, the appreciation for the human detail he found along the way. The body language cue to watch here. If she's asking with bright eyes, if she follows up with, "And then what happened?" or "Where would you go next?" she's not just being friendly, she's picturing the two of you somewhere together.
Question 5. You seem like someone who's really at peace with himself. How did you get there? This is the one. This is what everything else has been building toward. When a woman says something like this, and she might phrase it differently, maybe "you seem so calm," or "there's something settled about you," or "you strike me as someone who's figured some things out," she is no longer testing. She is confessing. She's telling you that she's been watching you, that something about your presence has attracted her, and she's inviting you, directly and vulnerably, to let her in a little further. Most men, when they receive a compliment like this, deflect. They say something modest and move on. "Oh, I don't know about that." Or they get awkward and change the subject. This is a missed opportunity of the highest order. What she's really asking is, "Tell me your story. Tell me how you became this person. Let me see something real." At an outdoor concert in Tucson, a woman named Beverly sat down next to a man named Robert, a 74-year-old widower with a calm, unhurried way about him. After they'd been talking for a while, Beverly said, "You seem very settled in yourself. Most men your age seem either too restless or too shut down. What's your secret?" Robert looked at her honestly and said, "Honestly, a lot of hard years and a few good decisions. I lost my wife 6 years ago, and I spent about 2 of those years just waiting to feel like myself again. And then I decided that whatever time I had left, I was going to spend it on things that felt true. Small things. Coffee on the porch in the morning, walking my neighborhood at dusk, calling my grandchildren just to hear them talk. I think peace isn't something that arrives, it's something you practice." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's one of the most honest things anyone has ever said to me." They exchanged numbers before the concert ended. What Robert did was not performative. He didn't brag, he didn't pretend the last few years had been easy. He told the truth in a way that was warm, thoughtful, and showed that he genuinely reflected on his life. That is irresistible to a woman at this age. Women who have lived full lives are not impressed by invulnerability. They've met plenty of men who couldn't admit to struggling. What they find genuinely attractive is a man who has been through difficulty and come out of it with wisdom, not bitterness. A man who has learned something. A man who has, as Beverly put it, figured some things out.
The real story behind these questions. Here's what connects all 5 of these questions. They're not really about retirement or cooking or family or travel or philosophy. They're about one central thing. She wants to know whether the man standing before her is still alive, not in a biological sense, but in the sense that truly matters. Does he still have a connection to the world? Can he still feel enthusiasm, grow, and form genuine bonds? Is there someone within him who is worth knowing? Women at senior age have earned the right to be selective. They know exactly what they want and what they don't. They've learned to read people quickly. When they ask these questions, they're not filling silence. They're gathering information that will tell them whether to keep the door open or gently close it. One more story before we wrap up. A man named Gerald, 76, came to one of our community workshops last spring. He'd been widowed for 4 years and had all but decided that romance was simply no longer part of his future. "I'm not trying to be negative," he told us. "I just think that chapter is closed." He sat in the back, arms crossed, listening politely. About 3 months later, he sent us a message. He'd been at his granddaughter's graduation party when a woman named Miriam, a friend of the family, someone he'd spoken to maybe twice before, started asking him questions about his life in retirement, about how he managed at home, about his relationship with his kids, about a recent trip he'd taken to see his brother in Vermont. And then, near the end of the evening, she said, "You know, Gerald, you seem like someone who's genuinely happy in his own skin. That's not as common as you'd think." Gerald said that in the past, he would have brushed that off with a self-deprecating joke and moved on. Instead, remembering what he'd learned, he paused and said, "It took a while to get here, honestly, but yes, I think I am." And then he asked about her. They've now been dating for 2 months. Gerald described it simply: "I didn't change who I am, I just stopped being blind to what was right in front of me." That's the whole thing, really. You don't need to become someone new, you just need to see what's been there all along. If you're over 70, the landscape of dating and connection might feel foreign. The rules seem to have changed, the signals aren't as obvious as they used to be, and there's a voice in the back of your head, maybe a quiet one, maybe a loud one, that says, "You've had your time." That voice is wrong. Women at senior age are looking for depth, steadiness, honesty, humor, and the kind of presence that only comes from having actually lived. They're not asking for perfection, they're asking for realness. If you're a woman, you can ask a man who catches your eye these 5 questions and make your decision based on his answers. If you're a man, you've finally realized what these questions actually mean. And of course, you've learnt what answers to give. Never pretend to be someone you're not. Honesty is the most important thing. What do you think about these questions? Can you think of any other useful questions? Please share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please don't forget to like it and subscribe so you don't miss out on similar content.